Hi, it's Crystal, and welcome back to my channel, all about books. Please subscribe, and if you like my video, please click like. Any questions, comments, please feel free to do so. So I finished my daily readings of Beauty Beneath the Banyan. Thank you so much to everyone who has listened, and thank you for all of your questions that have been emailed to me. I thought what I would do today is answer some of those questions. And again, thank you for taking the time to send them to me. Now, you'll have to excuse me because I will be turning my head to read some of those questions. So the first one is, how long did it take you to write the novel? Well, I wrote the novel in really two stages, you could say. The first stage was 6 months. My parents were kind enough to let me live with them, and I focused solely on writing the novel, which was an absolute gift. But after 6 months, I really needed to make money. So I went to China to teach at an international school, and I was there for 2 years. So that book, it actually sat for 2.5 years because I traveled for 6 months when my contract was up. But that ended up being the absolute best thing because that time, it just, after being stimulated with teaching and all of the incredible things that I saw traveling, it just really sparked the creativity, so that when I came home, I sat down probably close to a year and finished it off. So in total, about a year and a half. Did you do a lot of research? Yes, I did. I learned a lot about the Vietnam War, and fortunately, I was a history major, so I really did love researching. And when you have access with the internet to pretty much anything, I spent a lot of time getting sidetracked as well. And importantly, it was amazing how much information contradicted. I really had to rely on solid sources. I used the BBC a lot. There was foundations, for example, that were set up that specifically talked about survivor stories from the Khmer Rouge, a lot of nonprofits that went into the area. You just really had to pick your sources because anything from even the length of the Ho Chi Minh tunnels, like there was discrepancies with that. So I had to dig deep and just really try to be as consistent as possible. So yes, very good thing that I liked history and it was my background in school. How did you decide on your characters' names? That was actually really fun. It's like naming your children. I love naming my characters, and of course, I'm not familiar with Thai or Cambodian names. So what I ended up doing was Googling Thai baby names and Cambodian baby names, and went through the list of names and picked out the names that I liked. But I have to confess, with Isra, I made an error and selected a male name for her. So I went and I wrote her story, calling her a male name, which was Atid. And because I double check and triple check, I caught this mistake, but only at the end after I'd written her story. And I was so attached to the name it did. It was really hard for me to switch over to Isra. And sometimes I catch myself wanting to say Atid, but I do love the name Isra, so it works out. But it's amazing how you do get so attached to certain aspects of your character, and it is hard to let go. I certainly found that. Who was your most challenging character to write? Well, I have two characters that I found challenging to write. First of all, would have been Soldier. To have to write someone who's struggling so deeply with post traumatic stress syndrome was really hard. I was having dreams at night, just because it forces you to go to a really dark place. And yeah, I can't imagine what it would be like to be living with PTSD, because I know it was, even as a writer, it was hard to dip into that. So he was hard from that perspective, and I really struggled with a runny as well. Um, I ended up probably writing her story about three-quarters of the way through, and I had to stop. I'm not really sure why I struggled with her so much. Um, Maybe subconsciously, because I was worried that when the book was published, people would think that her story was my story because I don't have children. And it could be as simple as that. But I did have trouble writing a running. Who was your favorite character or most fun character to write? Without a doubt, there would be two. In the females, I loved writing Isra, because Isra is the polar opposite of me. She's very strategic. She knows what's going on and she goes for it. And yeah, I, not that I would ever want to murder anyone, but of course not. But just because she was so different from me, I really enjoyed going there. And Raven, I also really enjoyed for that very same reason, like this maverick, this cowboy swinging pilot. It just fun to go there and fun to be in that headspace. And I enjoyed those two for sure. That said, you become close to all of your characters because you do so spend so much time with them. But there was just something about Isra and a Raven. How did you keep your characters straight? Ah, okay. So what I did was, for example, I would write one character all the way through. So when I started with the men, like I would totally finish off their chapter. And that way I would be in that headspace, mind space, everything. And be able to walk through it that way. And that was the same that I did with the women. It just easier that way. You're not likely to flip into a different character's perspective if you're sitting with that one voice. So that's what I did, with the exception of I had mentioned that a runny sat for a bit, but I had finished grandmother solid and then went back to and finished a runny off. But yeah, so that's how I kept them straight. And their stories were so different that it wasn't a struggle to stay in the headspace as well. You wrote the novel over 10 years ago. If you were to write it again, what would you do differently? It's a good question. I mean, the book sat well, I mean, it was published over 10 years ago. So I'd mentioned when I was doing my readings, it was actually really hard to read through it because I kept thinking, oh, I would write this differently. And I think a part of that comes with, you mature as a writer and you improve. So you're always wanting to keep improving. So something that you've written over 10 years ago, even though you're really proud of it, you do see ways that you could do it better. Um, and structurally, what I would do differently, I was, and I remember at the time, I really wanted to alternate the chapters evenly. So you would have the women, each one's voice would chapter would follow the other, and then it would rotate. And that was a very conscious decision that I made. But if I was to do it again, I would be a little more flexible. And at the end, I would have written, like, I believe Isra got a little bit ahead in the timeline. So I would have stopped Isra and then just alternated between grandmother and a runny until we got caught up with Isra. So that's something I would do different structurally. Oh, and actually, I will add to that as well. I think that for me, it probably wouldn't matter what book I'd written. If if I went back a year or two later, I would always see things that I would want to do differently. Who would you want to meet? That's an interesting question. Who would I want to meet? Well, I feel like I've met all of the characters because I spent so much time with them in my head. So I feel like I've met them all and know them all really well. And if you were to like physically say I had to choose, I couldn't choose because they're also all uniquely special too. Grandmother, I felt really attached to and very sad in a lot of ways with her story. But yeah, I think I if I could meet them all, I would meet them all. Couldn't pick one over the other. Okay, here. Why did you inject yourself into the story? Because I couldn't help myself. When I was traveling through Southeast Asia, there were just so many things that I saw that impacted me, and some things were really hard to see. And I really felt because it was hard that I wanted to share it. You know, you want to share these people things with people because you want to make a difference and you want people to be aware. And I'll use the example of the little girls on the beach who were fighting over my friend and I to try and sell fruit. Um, that was, I mean, that was a horrible day for us as tourists to be sitting on this beautiful beach enjoying the day, and then one little girl came up and she wanted us to buy her fruit, and my friend and I, we just had breakfast, we didn't want any. And then 2 hours later another little girl came up and she wanted to sell us fruit, and by then we felt that we'd like a snack, and then a big fight erupted in front of us with these two little 7 and 8 year old girls duking it out. And it was at that moment, you realize the impact you have as a tourist on a developing country. And it was shocking. And for me, I felt it was really important to share that, because I think as a wealthy country going into these countries that are not as lucky as us, you really have to think of how you interact with people. And that's why I injected myself into the story. Um, Why did you write the novel? Um, I wrote it for a lot of different reasons. I think probably one of the main reasons would be, you know, growing up in Canada and being so incredibly blessed. Like, we're lucky to be Canadian. And when you go to these countries that have been touched by a war so many years later, you want people to be. I'm not saying that Canadians aren't thankful, but you just really want to reiterate how lucky we are to live here. But also, there's the hope of opening, like my experiences, to open other people's eyes to see the unexplored ordnance that is still over in Laos, which was neutral during the Vietnam War, and how, in a tiny village, how every week 3 people are either maimed or killed. Like, that's just incredible. But I think we as global citizens should know what's going on, and that was really important to me. And the other thing is, history, as we know, repeats itself. And, you see that in bombing of Iraq, and it just, and I think that's what I wanted, the message that I wanted to get through, is that we keep making these mistakes, and we just need to, we need to stop, really. And I just so believe in peace and the good of people. And I also really wanted that to come through as well. And when I came home from spending so much time in Asia, I felt like I was a different person. And I'm very thankful for what I saw and who I encountered. And I wanted to share that. So that would be the other part of that. And those are the questions. So thank you again so much. And I will see you next week. Thank you.